Okay, folks, it's time to have some fun with one of my all time favorite movies. Now, I can't tell you how many times I watched the movie Highlander when I was a kid. Highlander is a 1995 movie starring Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery that details, well, I don't want to spoil it for you. So if you go to the video description, please do go and watch the movie. I'm going to have a link to it on Amazon Prime, and it is free currently to Amazon Prime members. So if you have the chance, you can watch Highlander and Highlander 2, the sequel, on Amazon Prime for free. Now, I don't know when you're watching this video, but hopefully it's still free by the time you have a chance to check it out. And the question I want to ask about the movie, since I've just recently had a chance to rewatch it, is there a second rape in Highlander? Now, I will get to the first rape in a little bit, but this is going to be a complete fan theory type broadcast. This is not canonical, anything that I'm saying. This is not something that's been backed up in any article that I've read. This is just something I've put together from my watching Highlander, the director's cut, and coming away with some conclusions and connections that I did not make before. So again, this is going to be very spoilerish. So if you haven't seen the movie Highlander, I highly recommend that you do. There will be a link in the video description to it on Amazon Prime. It is free, and please do go watch it before coming back to watch this video. I don't want to spoil anything for you. So I'm going to give you a 5 count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, this is your final spoiler warning. Here we go. Highlander is the story of Connor MacLeod. He is a 15th century Scotsman who happens to be immortal. And this film chronicles some sections in his life, especially if you're watching the director's cut, up through the centuries to modern day New York, which is 1995. Is it New York or is it some other place? It's got Madison Square Garden, so wherever the hell that's located, that's where this takes place. So Connor MacLeod is an immortal. He is imbued with this mystical life force called the Quickening. And this Quickening will regenerate him from any injury save one. If he gets beheaded, he dies. And so he is mentored by Sean Connery's character, Juan Villalobos Ramirez. There's probably more names in his name than that, but he is a Spaniard. And the irony is that Christopher Lambert, when he was hired to play Connor MacLeod, a Scotsman, Christopher Lambert is a French actor who did not know any English at the time that he was hired to play this movie. So he spent a lot of time with a voice coach and an English coach and an accent coach trying to get his dialect down. It never really works. It's just listening to this French guy try to pull off a Scottish accent is pretty hilarious. And meanwhile, Sean Connery, who is an actual Scotsman, he's playing a Spaniard, and he's not even trying. He's just using his own voice, which is fine. I mean, this is not one of those kinds of movies where you care. It's kind of like the interview that Mark Hamill gave, where he was talking to Harrison Ford on the set of Star Wars, and it was just after the trash compactor scene, and he was like, shouldn't my hair be all matted and gross and all that? And Harrison Ford tells him, it ain't that kind of movie, kid. If they're looking at your hair, we've already blown it. So this is a movie that you wind up swallowing a lot of stuff just wholesale. And but let's get on to the main topic, because what I want to discuss is whether there's actually 2 rapes in Highlander rather than 1. What am I referring to as the first and obvious rape? Well, in the 15th century, Connor MacLeod is married to Heather, that's his wife, and he also has an enemy, the Kurgan, who is played by Clancy Brown. If you don't know who Clancy Brown is, you might actually recognize him as the head guard in The Shawshank Redemption, or you might recognize him well, there's no way you could recognize him, but you might know him as the voice of Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob SquarePants. He was also in a very excellent ABC TV series called Emergence, where he plays the kind of like the patriarchal grandfather in a blended step family kind of situation, and he does a wonderful job in that. I think he also had a role in Lost for a brief time, but in any case, Clancy Brown plays Connor McLeod's mortal enemy, the Kurgan. And during after a particular battle in the movie, the Kurgan literally gets hold, that's his hand around Heather's neck, of Connor McLeod's wife, and it is implied at that point that he rapes her, a point that is made explicit when hundreds of years later the Kurgan is telling Connor McLeod to his face that, hey, I raped your wife, which is something that she had never revealed to him being away, I'm thinking on a several days away journey at the time. So, the question is there only one rape in Highlander? This is riffing on the tagline, there can be only one, which refers to the fact that these immortals have to kill each other over time until only one is left. So, there is this scene in Highlander. And no, I'm not going to try and convince you that there was some sort of male-on-male rape. Please get your mind out of the gutter. There is a scene in Highlander that it kind of stands alone by itself. It's shown as part of a montage of Sean Connery training Connor McLeod in the ways of being an immortal. And this particular scene of the montage, though, is a little bit out of place just because, well, for a reason that I'll explain a little bit later. So, in this particular scene, Sean Connery stops McLeod as they're walking along on the beach, and he's been explaining, things about immortality, presumably, and Sean Connery spots this stag. And no, they don't rape the stag. Please don't try to get ahead of me. Just go along with what I'm saying here. He spots this stag, and then he starts telling McLeod, you need to reach out with your feelings to the stag. Reach out, try and feel its heart beating, feel its blood pumping. And you can see as Sean Connery is telling him about this, Sean Connery is doing exactly what he's telling McLeod to do, and he's starting to get into this animalistic kind of feral kind of mode, and his feet even start pawing the ground as if he's about to take off running. And sure enough, Sean Connery and McLeod, they both tap in to this stag's life essence, and they take off running down the beach, and the stag itself also takes off running. And then finally you have a scene of the two of them jumping off of a cliff, basically cliff diving into the ocean, and Sean Connery yells, "This is the quickening!" And what's interesting about that is that the quickening is this phenomenon, the life force that empowers the immortals, and any time that an immortal is killed, this quickening is drained out of the immortal who dies into the immortal who survives. Or into the immortal who killed the other immortal. So there is this scene in which you have this quickening ability to sync up with an animal and maybe acquire some of its traits in some way, shape, or form, or its behavior in some way, shape, or form. Now, what's really screwy about it, though, is that this particular ability of immortals never comes up again in the entire film. And so it violates the principle of Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is a principle for writing plays and short stories that says you should remove everything that has no relevance to the story. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, then in the second or third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. And this was a rule that was put forth by the Russian playwright and short story author Anton Chekhov, who lived from 1860 to 1904, only 44 years old when he died from tuberculosis. Definitely not an immortal himself. So it's weird that you have this excursion into the quickening and this ability to sync up with other life forms if it should never happen in the film ever again. But does it? See, here's where we have to jump forward to the future, and we focus on Connor McLeod's love interest in the present day. There is a CSI, a forensic analyst, named, and she's into metallurgy, so this is why she's so particularly fascinated with the sword that she's holding. Her name is Brenda, and she works for the police, and she wants to solve the mystery of this $1 million sword that she's discovered in a parking garage, which is where Connor McLeod had just had a sword fight with another immortal. And Connor McLeod, having seen her take an interest in the sword, decides to track her down himself. And so he meets up with her in a bar, and he wants to, well, who knows what he wants to do at this point. I don't know if he's trying to, kind of suss out what she knows about him, or if he's just romantically attracted to him. It's kind of not really clear. But what we do know is that later on, she, through a series of investigations, realizes that this Connor McLeod is an immortal who has been living under a series of assumed identities for the last few hundred years. And so he confesses to her that he is an immortal, and he proves it to her by taking this dagger and stabbing himself with it right in front of her, after which point she is absolutely amazed to see that he is healed up, and he's got, that's his own blood on his hand. And then they make out, and they don't just make out, they land in bed. Okay, hold up a second. You've got a guy who just stabbed himself in front of you. And instead of, running away screaming, which is what any sane person would do at this point, you've got Brenda here making out with the guy and falling into bed with him. It's freaking crazy. I haven't seen a love story this crazy until Attack of the Clones. Here's Amidala listening to Anakin Skywalker talking about how he just killed an entire village, men, women, and children. And she's like, well, anger's a part of being human. Oh no, honey, no. If you are just told by your guy that he's just slaughtered an entire town, he's just committed an act of mini genocide, you back up onto your flying saucer and you get right the hell out of there. You don't sit down next to him and cup his head and say, oh, I can fix him. No, dear God. Queen Amidala's story arc throughout the prequels is one of the worst anti-feminist story arcs in all of sci-fi history. I'm sorry, it's just so bad. But this is not about Star Wars. This is about Highlander, so let's get back to the topic. So you've got this guy, he's actually got his own blood on his hands, and instead she just leans in to kiss him. Oh, come on. Which leads me to wonder, did Chekhov's gun fire at this point? Because you got to remember, going back to that scene with Sean Connery and Christopher Lambert on the beach, Sean Connery spots the stag, but the stag is not running. The stag is not making a move to run. It's Sean Connery who starts pawing the ground with his feet and starts taking off running, and then Connor McLeod follows after him, and then the stag is running. So it's not that the stag influenced Sean Connery to go running. Sean Connery influenced the stag to go running. Now think again back to Brenda's motivations. She's looking into this as a big mystery. There is this sword that is an antique. It is a great find. Why is it here? And that leads her to Connor McLeod, who himself is actually an antiques dealer in the present day. That's kind of his way of staying connected to his past. And so she interacts with him on that basis. And she also finds out that he's a suspect in the beheading of the guy who had the sword that she found. So then her discovery of the mystery, I mean, this is all very much her ploy to try to get him to confess to either his connection to the quote unquote murder in the parking garage, but also to explain what the heck is up with that sword. Why is there this ancient sword there? And what is up with his, possibly being a 400-year-old guy that's gone through multiple lives and recorded himself down as multiple persons over the years, she's got this whole big mystery in her head. There's not really a sense that she's necessarily that attracted to him. In fact, he's the one who basically says, I'd like to take you to, or why don't we have dinner sometime or something. It's a convoluted movie, so you got to watch it for yourself, and please do. It's you will be amazed. But in any case, the fact that he brings her and then he unleashes this quickening power to regenerate himself, because he stabs himself, and of course it's the quickening, the life force, that makes him regenerate, but it's also the quickening that can sync him up with other beings. And so when he's looking at her here and he's interested in her, is that influencing her the same way that Sean Connery's character influenced the stag in the earlier scene? Is Connor McLeod actually using the quickening on Brenda, whether it's conscious or unconscious, we don't know, to influence her to fall into bed with him? It's possible. So the question is, did Brenda actually have consensual sex with McLeod in their sex scene, or did McLeod use the quickening to coerce Brenda into having sex with him, which would make it a sort of rape? Well, do we have any supporting evidence for this? And I think we do. We have two pieces of supporting evidence. Now, one of those pieces, I'm not sure if it shows up just in the director's cut, because the director's cut does have some scenes in it that do not appear in the American version, and I grew up watching the American version, which does not have those scenes. And honestly, I want to say, if you have a choice between seeing the original or the American version and seeing the director's cut, I actually recommend the American version, because the scenes that were cut from the director's cut actually didn't make sense, and they didn't add anything to the movie, and I think it made for a better movie without those. So I have to disagree with Russell Mulcahy here, who had actually said that he regrets those scenes having been cut from the American version, but I do think that they don't have a place in the movie. I may go into that in some other video, but anyway, in the director's cut that I was watching, and again, I'm not sure whether it's in the director's cut or in the actual, the American version as well, you have a hard cut, a jump cut, right from this bedroom scene to these lions playing and roughhousing in a cage, and that's a male and a female lion there, and you have this kind of connection between the animalistic sexual activity of McLeod and Brenda in bed with the animalistic activity of these lions. And where is the only other time that you see an animal prominently featured on screen? Well, it's when you had the stag. When you had the stag that Sean Connery synced up with. So it kind of jarred my mind when I saw this. That's kind of like, oh, animalism and all that. And then it was like, I kind of remember him interacting with an animal before. And that just kind of connects the two in my mind. So that when Sean Connery's character was using the quickening to influence the stag, maybe McLeod was doing the same thing with Brenda. But I think that the real clincher on this fan theory of mine comes from the sequel, Highlander 2. Now, I'm not going to explain how there actually is a sequel to this movie, because let me tell you, the movie Highlanders does not lend itself to believing that any sequel is forthcoming. But, and here's more spoilers, so, by the way, Highlander 2 is also free on Amazon Prime, so if you do want to watch Highlander 2 after watching Highlander for free, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can. But let's just say the movie has a way of carrying forward. In fact, here's your spoiler countdown: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Spoilers for Highlander 2 now. Highlander 2 starts with McLeod having become an old man. He's lost his immortality, and now he's just growing old and kind of waiting to die. And his attitude is not liked at all by the eco-activist played by, and I don't remember what her name is. No, I remember that it's Virginia Madsen. but I don't remember the character's name. So Virginia Madsen is playing an eco-activist who believes that she has information capable of saving the world. She brings it to Connor McLeod, who was instrumental in creating this device that saved the world before, except McLeod's an old man. He's tired. He just wants to lay down and die and drink himself into stupor, and he doesn't want to confront the challenges of the world anymore, and she's just absolutely disappointed and disgusted with him. She still tries to pester him into helping her, but things intervene, and in the course of their intervening, he regains his immortality. The quickening takes a hold of him again. He is restored to youth, and then you have a similar scene in which Virginia Madsen, now that she sees him as his younger self. Now remember, just a few minutes ago, he looked like this, but now he looks a little studly. And so she's like, hey, let's hook up. And they do. He bangs her like a screen door right in the alleyway. It's just, what? What? You know, how is this happening? But it's happening just like before. He's just had the quickening take a hold of him, and when he's got the quickening on him, I tell you what, he's got mojo. So those are my thoughts on Highlander and Highlander 2, to say that, you know, I think this quickening thing is being used by McLeod. Again, it's maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, as a form of coercive rape. Your mileage may vary. Those are just my thoughts. If you want more of my thoughts, please do go to my Amazon books link and check out my newest book, Thoughts Along the Way, Collected Writings, 1999 to 2020. 20 years, over 20 years of my writings on politics, religion, and life in general, as well as a few poems and songs thrown in. I think you'll find it a very interesting read, and I hope you pick up a copy and check out my other copies, or my other books at Amazon while you're looking at that. Thank you for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe so that when I come out with my next videos on who knows what, you can get a notification, because I don't do these nearly as often as I did before. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you later.